I'm Linda Lawrence. I'm a paraprofessional at Andover High School. I've been there for 20 years. Stephanie Hand is a special education teacher. She does science, usually small classrooms. She's been there 20 years. And Helen is our speech and language pathologist that I rely on a lot. We have all worked together for more than 10 years, and we're doing this because our team, our collaboration between the three of us has helped a lot of kids, and I've gained a lot of information and knowledge from these two ladies.
Yeah, it really is synergistic.
We have from Linda as well.
Yeah, there's something, if you can get yourself as part of a good team, there's no stopping you. It's important. Everyone's voice is important, and everyone brings some, something to the table, and we all bring important things to the table. So yeah. All right. So Steph, how about, do you want to talk a little bit about the responses in the chat?
Sure. A number of people talked about the fact that that they're legal documents and they're binding. They're about the needs of the student, not about the needs of the parent, not about the needs of the teachers. And that's really something we're going to deal with a lot. I like that someone said it lists the services that we are obligated to provide and how much time is involved, the minutes needed. So again, there, let's see. Gina mentioned that it helps students access the curriculum. And again, there are terms in here that are basic to working in special ed. And we're going to be defining really the most important terms that we use all the time. So a lot of you are coming in with a really good broad general knowledge, and that's great. So please feel free to share what you know as well. This is a workshop and participation is really, really important. We all wish this were in person, although there are some advantages about being home now. But the personal interaction means a lot to us. So again, we'd like this to be as interactive as possible. So please feel free to speak up, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So
Linda.
Okay, so today we're going to look at helping you to understand the IEP process, especially the jargon. And also we're going to talk about collaborating with your teachers and with other IAs. So
and as Linda said, this is pretty important. Like, we firmly believe in collaboration, and we believe in the importance of it and the importance of what you do, quite frankly. You're in with students in a way that many of us can't be. So all of our voices are important, and finding the ways to collaborate that validates what everybody brings to the table is really important to us.
Okay, so the next couple of slides are just basic. I'm sure you've all been on Zoom enough to know this, but please keep mute unless you're talking, and please keep your video cameras on. Like we said, we're hoping this will be somewhat interactive, and we'd like to see you. Please, if we understand your home, if you need to use your cell phone, if you need to do something else, that's fine, but limit it if you can. If you're normally a talker like Helen, Linda, and I are, please step back just a little bit. We want you to participate, we want you to speak, but again, we want you to be respectful of other people being able to speak as well. If you're quiet, put yourself out a little bit. You're among friends here. If you have questions, please put them into the chat. We will get to them and we will answer them. It just might not be, right away. We're not going to have a break. We need to fix this slide because it's only an hour. We only have an hour and a half. And there may be some time that you may find that we're talking too fast. You can tell us that, but again, there's so much that we want to say and we don't have that much time to say it in. Okay, so the Zoom piece, if you want to say anything on Zoom, on the very bottom, go to the toolbar, go to participants. Your name will be on the sidebar. Click more, raise your hand. There's an icon if you want to. If you want to chat, click the chat box. If there's anything in terms of participation that you need, if you want us to go slower, go faster, if you don't like something we said, you could express it that way as well. So that's pretty much our online information. And now we're ready to get into the meat of the workshop. So we said we talk about jargon and acronyms. Every single subject has its own vocabulary, and special ed does as well. The first thing, and this is a cornerstone of special ed law, is FAPE, free and appropriate public education. This definition is from the DESE website, and there's something that we want to recommend that if you get a chance, if you go to the DESE website, there's in the special ed section, there's a parent's guide to special ed. It's about 45 pages long, so if you can download it at school and print it out, it's a really good resource to have. It's got all of the vocabulary you will ever need and some things that you don't need. But this is really, it's a really good resource. So free and appropriate public education. Well, we all know that there's no such thing as a free lunch. And the free public education comes from everybody's tax dollars. Appropriate is also an interesting term because what some people feel is appropriate education, others do not. And this is something that needs to be resolved as we develop an IEP and as we move forward. Because this can lead to misunderstandings, it can lead to a certain amount of confusion as well. But again, FAPE is one of the cornerstones of special ed law. The next jargon or the next acronym is LRE, the least restrictive environment. This means that students should be in the place where they can do their best if they weren't disabled, and the LRE is different for different kids. For most people, we hope the least restrictive environment is the general ed classroom with or without assistance or accommodations. If that won't allow a student, if a student can't be successful in a larger classroom, then the least restrictive environment might be a small, substantially separate class, like the ones that I teach. If that is not going to allow the student to be successful, then a different program or a different setting, and this is where outplacements come in, may be called for, and that may be the least restrictive environment. And again, we have to consider any kind of support or service that we can give students in order to keep them in the least restrictive environment. And again, we hope that that's going to be in a general ed classroom. But if a student can't be successful there, then we another environment has to be selected for the student. And this can also lead to conflict. Some parents, for example, want their students in a general ed classroom. They want full inclusion. That may not be the appropriate place for a student. They may thrive in a smaller environment. They may thrive in a different type of program, and the general ed classroom may just not be that case. The same way, there are parents who want their child in a small separate classroom when they would do just fine with everybody else and some accommodations or an assistant in the class. So this is also kind of fuzzy. Like a lot of the jargon, it's very loose and subject to interpretation. And again, this has to be hashed out, and the IEP meeting is usually the place where it gets decided on. Okay, now, effective progress is another one of these great terms. First of all, we want to stress that it's making documented growth. Who's doing the documenting? Keep that on the back of your head. We're going to come back to documentation in a minute. It's not only getting knowledge and skills. It includes social development, emotional development in the general ed program with or without accommodations, but it also has to be determined by the age of the child and developmental expectations, which can differ between what the school's expectations are and what the parents' expectations are. And let's not forget about the Massachusetts learning standards. So it's an individualized inquiry based on teacher, parent, and evaluator input. And here is something we, again, can't stress enough. Teachers rely on your observations and insights. Whether you're one-on-one with a student, or you're in a small group session, or whether you're a paraprofessional or an instructional assistant in an inclusion class. Your input is vital. So is the idea of documentation. And this is where you may be asked to do some of the documentation if you're working with a student. Because again, how we measure effective progress is supposed to be done based on data, and data taking is a very, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of heart as well. So again, effective progress is also a generalized fuzzy term. What a teacher may think is effective progress, the parent may not, and vice versa. So, this is something you need to understand what these terms mean and how they're used.
Any questions so far? Are any of you required to take data? Yeah, Kathy, Kumar, you are? Yeah, are you in a substantially separate classroom, or are you in a regular classroom? Where are you?
So I was in a subset for the last 4 years, and this year I was put into an autism immersion classroom.
So a lot of ABA going on?
Yes.
So yeah, so in case any of you are not familiar with that term, applied behavior analysis is a type of programming that we use for some students with autism to help with developing communication and other types of behaviors. It's becoming controversial, I will say that, but it is still a program that we see a lot use for. And I believe that it is an important program in some cases. I think that we need to think about it a little bit more judiciously when we go back to the idea of least restrictive environment. So who would benefit from that versus who would not? I also tend to believe, as a speech pathologist, that natural communication is pretty important too. But I don't see that the two cannot get along. All right. Anyone else taking data these days? Not yet. Okay. Well, the world's changing. And if you're in a regular classroom, I wouldn't be surprised if you're asked sooner rather than later. All right. Sorry, Steph.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, so the IEP, looking at what we have on the slide, a lot of this you guys brought up in the chat at the very beginning. So it's called an individual education program, but we always call it a plan. It's a contract between the school and the parents, where we say what we are going to be doing for the child to help them succeed. It's in writing. It outlines the services. It includes accommodations and modifications, which we're going to get into in a little bit. There are goals and objectives for the student that the student has to be working on over the course of the period of the IEP, which is 1 year from the time that it is implemented. We like to think of it as a communication vehicle between parents and the school, because if things are spelled out and everybody understands what's expected, things are better for the student and they flow much better. And the bottom line here is we want what's best for the student. And we also like to look at it as a working document. And it should be developed collaboratively between the school and the parents. And when we say a working document, it's something that should be referred to over the course of the year, not just looked at and then stuck in a drawer. So that's basically the IEP, and all of us who work with the student are required to follow it. And again, once it is signed by the parent and the school, we don't have a choice. We have to follow it because it's a legal document. And if we don't follow it, we will be subject to litigation. We can be subject to litigation, depending on the parents.
Should I move on?
Yeah. And again, feel free to break in at any point.
So for the collaborative process, parents really are equal partners, and the student participation becomes a lot more important as they get older. When the kids are really young, finding a place of agreement with parents is really critical. I have experienced both sides of that. My son has autism and had a one-on-one assistant through 8th grade, and then went to a smaller school. So I know that the support that he received and the input that I could give made things go so much better for him. And the approach of the people that I worked with was always looking at collaboration, which made my role as a parent much easier. And I think if we approach parents that way, we get a much better result. There will always be parents that are either not involved, which makes life very difficult for students, or parents that are over involved. And that's kind of for the higher ups to deal with them. You know, our goal is to be with our students and make that relationship really strong. And I think when that happens, parents do see that and do appreciate it, and it makes it easier to work with them. And again, what Steph keeps saying is that this process is driven by the student. And when you're with the student and you've developed that relationship and you see where the strengths and weaknesses are, that input is extremely valuable for the whole IEP process and for that student's daily school life.
Right. So what do we really want when it comes to special ed? Well, ultimately, our goal is to provide our students with access to an appropriate education with the skills that they need to be successful in whatever comes next for them. So in some high schools, the expectation is that everyone will go to college, but not everybody goes to college. Not everybody wants to, not everybody needs to. And our job is to make sure that we validate a student's wishes and concerns as we move forward, and their parents, in a realistic way, so that they can be successful in whatever they decide is coming next. Really what we want are adults who are active and engaged members in their community to the extent that their abilities and their personalities allow. So I think sometimes when we're looking at the special ed process, we kind of forget that we're dealing with little human beings here. It's all this paperwork and goals and numbers, but really we want to be able to have them be active and engaged in a way that makes the most sense for them. So that's an important piece, and I think that that's an important message that all of us, need to be giving to our students and to the parents. Even when kids are little, we need to validate who they are. Sometimes when a student is on an IEP, they kind of end up under a microscope. And so what we would consider kind of typical behavior for an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 13-year-old. In this student, any little weaknesses turn into, is it a disability, right? And I think that if we're not careful and we don't think about this overarching goal, we can end up focusing a lot more on negative things than the positive. And that does a disservice to our students. So we always need to be looking at who they are, what are their personalities, and what are their abilities. We may have a student who does not do as well as we would prefer socially, but I will tell you that there are lots of people who don't need to have 1,000 friends. They don't, and they're perfectly fine with that. So sometimes, again, in the special ed process, when we're looking at, say, social communication, we may have parents or teachers who believe that you can't be successful socially unless you have 1,000 friends, unless you're this big monster friendship group. When we know that based on individual abilities and personalities, there are some people who hate having large groups of friends. They don't want that. They want 1 or 2. They only want to see people sometimes. And, if we keep that overarching goal in place, then we can be like, that's okay. You get that. You get to only want 1 or 2 friends and only want to see them once in a while. So if you take nothing else away from this, we need to remember that even though a student is in the special ed process, that does not mean that they aren't still a person with their own individual personalities and strengths and weaknesses and quirks, just like all of us. The other thing that I want to point out here is that we're also looking for independence. In the special ed process, sometimes it feels like once they're in, they never get out and they're reliant on us forever. That's also something that we need to work against, because again, when they leave us, then, hey, guess what? It's time to be independent. So even when they're little, we have to be thinking, can they do this on their own or not? So like, I don't like it when I have a 10th grader come to me and say, hey, tie my shoe. I'm like, I don't think so. How about tie your own shoe, right? If there's nothing wrong with those little fingers, you can't practice that. They should be tying their own shoes. Same thing when students are little. And I think sometimes those of us who are in a helping field, like all of us, we want to help. So sometimes it's easier to help them put the jacket on or tie the shoes or, you know, have them talk to a teacher. But we have to be able to push a little bit because we're looking for independent and responsible adults. So the other piece, just kind of logistically or factual stuff here, we will provide services to students starting from age 3, once they leave early intervention, if they've been in early intervention, through to the age of 22. And if they get to the age of 22, if they get to 18, if they take a diploma, we no longer provide services to them. But if they don't, we will provide services to students through the age of 22. So
But
Go ahead.
on their 22nd birthday, on
Yep.
that day, services terminate and they have
Right.
to move into adult services. And adult services are not as comprehensive as they are when they're in school.
Right.
They're in public schools.
Right. And so that's another reason that we really have to push for this idea of independence. That is our goal in special ed. We want our students to be independent, even though sometimes it can feel uncomfortable in the moment as we're helping them get to independent.
Mhm.
Independence isn't fun. My daughter still is calling me now at age 27 and she's like, being an adult stinks, Mom. And I'm like, yeah, it kind of does, honey. So like, there are plenty of times through our students' school careers where they're not going to really want to do things. And it's our job to, again, kind of gently nudge them to a
And we
place of independence.
and we don't want to encourage learned helplessness. We really don't. Kids are really smart about that. There are some kids that I've worked with in high school who they've really figured it out. If they can't do it, somebody will do it for them. And why not? So again, there's a fine line, and we're not saying don't help your students, make
Of
them
course.
become independent. But again, encourage them towards independence when it's possible.
Oh, that's our goal. I mean,
Yeah.
our end goal is to work ourselves out of a job with a particular student that we're no longer needed. One thing I wanted to say about looking at their behaviors once they're on an ed plan, and we do tend to look at it really closely. Again, with my son, when things cropped up, I had a couple of questions I always asked. Is it his age? Is it the autism? Or is he just being a jerk? Because depending on which one of those three, there's a whole different way that I'm going to relate to how to fix that. And, there are students, but yeah, they're human beings and they can be jerks. And that's, not part of their disability. So that's something to, just keep in mind which piece is actually happening. And again, I think, I'm extremely grateful for all the people that my son worked with that helped him become as independent as he is today. And I could not have done that alone. So and he just turned 30. So the impact, you guys don't see the impact because your students leave. I see the impact of what you do. And I see it and I live with it every day. And I'm very grateful. So our role as team members, we can be asked to go to team meetings. It seems like over the time that I've been doing this, that's happened less and less as things have become more involved with the legal aspects. But your teachers should be asking for your input before a team meeting. And if the parents want you to come, or if you're invited, I think that's great, because you have a relationship that a teacher doesn't have, that nobody else in the building has with that student. And there's a lot of insight there that's really valuable. And again, our role is kind of fuzzy, so check your contract, because it's different for every district. Some districts don't want our input. You know, they just want us to be in the classroom and be quiet, which is really sad.
All right. So the referral process is different at every school, every grade, every system. Parents can request referrals, teachers can, guidance counselors, social workers, advocates. You know, it's interesting because there tend to be more official ways, and across time it changes versus unofficial ways. You know, sometimes we need to just, if you see something, it's important for you to go to either the student's case manager or special ed teacher or primary teacher. If you're seeing issues, again, you are right in there with so many of our students that if you're seeing something, there's a good chance there's something. So it's important for you to take the steps to make sure that these issues are brought up with the teacher so that they can start to move into more official channels. So once there is a referral though, as soon as we get consent for evaluation, the special education department has 45 days to complete the evaluations and the reports and have a meeting. So within 30 days of getting a consent, if I'm testing someone, I have to have that testing done. And then within the next 15 or fewer days, I need to have a report written and sent to a parent so that they have time ahead of time to read the reports. So this process was put in place so that it can't drag on for months or years. It's pretty streamlined, and the deadlines are very set. We have to meet them. And if we don't, we have to have really good reasons why we don't. So we do different types of evaluations. The two that we see most frequently in special education are the psychological evaluations that look at cognitive functioning. They look at executive functioning, they look at emotional functioning, among other things. And academic. So the academic assessments look at, on a broad scale, at reading, writing, and arithmetic. So those are the ones we see the most, but then depending on what the needs are of the student or what we're saying for an issue, there may be a speech and language assessment, so that I would do, or an occupational therapy assessment, or an assistive technology assessment. So there are lots of different types of assessments that have to happen. And one of the things about this is that when a student is struggling in school and he's been referred for a special education evaluation, well, guess what? We have to start taking him out of his class. And if there are 4 or 5 of us who need to take him for an evaluation, and each evaluation takes 3 hours, that's a lot of time he's missing from class. But it has to happen. So often your role as a paraprofessional in a regular education classroom is to make sure that this student either gets the information they need, gets the homework assignments, gets the notes, or needs someone to advocate for them and say, like, yeah, there's no way that this student's going to be able to get all of this work done after they've been pulled out of classes for who knows how long.
And the other thing is, very often students are pulled out of the classes they like the most: PE, art, music, because they're less essential.
is what they say. Now, that actually is different
Yeah.
from district to district. There are some
Yeah.
districts we are not allowed to take kids out of music or PE. We're not allowed. And those of us who are evaluators, we try to make sure we take students from times, you know, typically like study times. But it is, you know, it is a process not without limitations or problems, because sometimes a kid is taken out when there's like some kind of special party going on, or you know, some, I don't know, some llama came to visit or whatever, and that could be, you know, that's terrible for the students. So once again, when we try to think about them as a whole person and take them and make it as you know, make it as little disturbance to them as possible, knowing that there's going to be a lot of disturbance. So the goal of this referral process is to come up with determination of a specific disability and to see if a student is eligible. And when we're determining eligibility, we have to ask a couple of questions, and the student we have to answer yes to both of these questions in order for a student to be eligible for special education. So the first one is, does the child have a disability? That's first. So then if the answer is yes, then the next question is, does this disability impact their ability to access the curriculum? And sometimes the answer to that's yes, and sometimes the answer to that is no. So if the answer is no to that one, then a student is not eligible for special education services. So kind of interesting. In the IEP world, there are 14, Stephanie, 14 different
10.
disability categories. 10? 10.
Yeah.
10 different disability categories. And we have to make sure that we choose the one that best fits that student. And that's not just, you know, it's an important consideration, because that is what presents the picture of this student as they move forward from team to team, from teacher to teacher, and it will determine the ways we might approach a student and work with them. So we tend to try to be pretty careful about what we decide is the primary disability for a student. And sometimes it can get heated as we try to come to that decision. All right, next.
Okay, so locating the IEP. We finally have computer access in Andover. We've had that for a couple of years. So that's made our life a lot easier. Before that, it was either going into the special ed office and looking at a hard copy, or getting a copy from the case manager or the teacher. So those are really the three routes. And you should all have access to the IEPs, the entire document, not just the summary. It gives you a better picture than just the summary, especially when it comes to parent and student concerns. None of that is in accommodations or modification information. Do you guys have access? Hopefully.
Kathy does.
Yes, we do.
Good.
She does. Good.
Hopefully everyone does. If not, I'm not sure why they wouldn't want you to have the document. Oh, good. Joan says she
Again.
has it too.
Yep. Again, you really can't do your job without it.
Right.
Good. And if you don't, you should go to the case manager or the special ed office to find out if you can.
Right. And if not, why not?
Right. If not, why not?
Because we are professionals, you know, and they want you to work with a student. The more complete your understanding is, the better it is for you, the better it is for that student. Okay, so parent and student concerns. And this again, this is something that changes over over the ages and depending on the disability. The student concerns as they get older become more articulate about what they're concerned about and more definite about the direction that they want to go. When they're younger, it's more reliant on the parent. But again, you need to look at that student as that individual human being. Parent and student concerns are actually the start of the IEP meeting. And the document needs to focus on those areas of concern. And that's a really good reason to read the IEP, because that first page tells you so much. It gives you their concerns, their current functioning, and their vision. And that vision is a 5-year vision. It's going to change every year, but still to see where that child wants to be, where their parents are hoping they'll be. It gives you a lot of information about how you want to approach things.
All right. So after we get the parent concerns, the next page in the document talks about student, or the next part of this same page actually talks about student strengths and key evaluation results. And this section names the disability and the scores on tests that were used to determine the disability, as well as any standardized testing. So we'll see all of that in there. So while it says that it's a summary, it's often very lengthy because it gives us a lot of the necessary information that we need to be helpful to work with the student. So within that, we find out the disability. We may also find out that there are secondary disabilities. So sometimes a student has autism and they have ADHD, or sometimes they have ADHD and they have a receptive language disorder. So if there are more than one disability, we need to list them, but we always consider what is the primary one. So it also talks about, again, how is the student doing in the general ed curriculum, as well as how are they doing on their tests and how they do on the MCAS and MAP testing and any other types of standardized testing that these poor kids are subjected to these days. And the 10 disability categories include autism, speech and language, developmental delays, ages 3 to 9, emotional, health, which is ADHD often in that one, among other health disabilities, intellectual, neurological, physical, sensory, which includes hearing and vision, or specific learning disability in math or written language or reading. So those are the 10 categories, and we have to make a decision about where they all fit. All right, so I'm going to show you a video in a minute, but I want to talk to you about something called the social model of disability. And we kind of started to refer to it earlier. We are talking now about this idea of our students as, more as human beings rather than numbers or disabilities, right? So, you're a person, you have autism, but you are not autism. You are autistic, if that's the label that you prefer, but you are not autism, right? And you may be a person who is impulsive, but you are not ADHD. So that's the first piece of this. So in the social model of disability, we're taking a look at disability from a different lens than the medical model. The medical model of disability says that there is something inherently wrong within the individual, right? So you have a disability and it's part of you, and we have to try to fix you. There's something wrong with you, and we're going to try to fix you somehow. The social model of disability, though, says that a person may or may not be disabled based on their environment. So if we don't have ramps, then a person who is not able to walk or who's in a wheelchair is disabled. But if we change the environment and put ramps in, well, now that person in the disability, in the wheelchair is no longer disabled. The social model of disability also says to us that once we do that, we have now opened up and enabled a lot of other populations as well. So people who ride bicycles, parents who have children in carriages, right? So lots of different people become enabled when we focus on a social model of disability. So, and I say that because we've alluded a little bit to this idea of autism and the idea that there's something wrong with you if you have autism, and the social model of disability would tell us that you do not. So just to give you a sense of what it's like to work with a person with autism, or to get a sense of how the perspective is different, we want to show you this video. So I'm going to try to show you this video and hope I don't mess it up. All right, so hold on. Hold on, not yet, Hannah. All right, let me go here and I need to optimize. That should do it for me. Okay, you ready? Do everyone see this?
Autism
It's a
was
little
terrible
small.
name for what I have.
All right, let me fix it. Let's get out of that. Let's see how I do this and don't lose it. Let's do that. I did it. Cool. So, just hold on, let me fix my sound here. Oh shoot, I don't know what I did there. All right, and that. What is that doing there? I have no idea. Okay, so that just to give you an idea of what we know that you often are dealing with in your classes. We have students who may have very different perspectives, and it's a funny video, but I wish that I didn't recognize the look on her face when she was being the teacher, right? Did anyone notice that? Like, what happened to the teacher, like, as you watched her face, right? There was a lot of judgment there and a lot of expectation that this person with autism would think exactly the way she did. So the social model of disability tells us that there are lots of different ways to think. There's also information out there, studies that show, it's called double blind problem, I'm going to say. I could be wrong, don't quote me on that one. But there are studies that show that people with autism actually communicate really well with other people with autism. And people who are, we used to call neurotypical, communicate much better with people who are neurotypical. The problem with communication happens when the two groups try to communicate with each other. So who's right? Right? So I'd like you to keep that in mind as you move forward, that once again, we need to be looking at the person, and you especially can be looking at the environment, right? So what is there in the environment that is disabling my student, as opposed to what's wrong with my student? Because lots of times students have behaviors, or they communicate, and they're communicating. They may not be doing it in the way that we want, but there may be things happening in their environments that we can change that can help them to communicate or, behave in ways that are more pleasant for everyone. Okay. Go ahead.
That's
Go ahead.
especially true with younger students, because they're not self-aware and they're not feeling comfortable, and they don't understand why they're not feeling comfortable. And that becomes even more frustrating for them. And we see that, again through high school. So helping them to process what's uncomfortable in the environment for them. It gives them the opportunity to maybe become more self-aware and then ask for help when things are starting to feel uncomfortable instead of waiting for things to explode.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Okay, Steph.
Okay, there are a few things since we're running out of time, as usual. So I'm going to speed things up in a couple of these slides so we can spend more time in other places. So the vision statement Linda talked about already and explained how this is a 1 to 5 year period, what the parents would like to see, what they expect to see, and where the student sees themselves as being in 5 years. It's not legally binding. So you can have parents who want their kids to be nuclear physicists and kids who want to be baseball players, and it changes every year. I just want to say my favorite example for this was a freshman who came in and his parents went through this whole elaborate discussion of how he was going to go to a good 4-year college and major in business or law. And the kid looked at his mother and said, "Mom, in 4 years, I'm going to be playing for the Red Sox." So again, by the time he graduated, he went to a 4-year college, but he was also a varsity baseball player. So it's a little bit of both.
All right.
The slides aren't moving, Helen.
Didn't I just move to slide 20?
No, we're still on Hannah Gadsby.
Okay, let's see what's happening here. I'm gonna stop my share for a minute, maybe.
Okay, while you're doing that, I can talk about the Flep A.
Yep, please do.
Okay. So there's the next section on the IEP is really important, and it's important to all of us. It's called the present levels of education performance in the general curriculum. That's called the Flep A. And it explains how the disability affects the student within the curriculum areas. It also details the accommodations, and it can get very specific that are needed for the student to make effective progress. And also if there's any specially designed instruction, and that's what we call modifications. So if you're changing, we're going to get into the differences between those two concepts. But again, accommodations and modifications are spelled out in the Flep A, and they are hugely important. You can't do your job without knowing the accommodations that are in place for the student, and you can't do your job without knowing what the modifications are. Also in the Flep A, the strengths of the students are listed, and that is huge for working with someone. If you know where they're really good and positive, you can use that to help them in the areas where they're not so good. Too often we focus again on what's wrong, what the student cannot do, rather than use the student's strengths to help them work around their problem areas. So again, this section is really important. And to further that idea, we want to go over the difference between an accommodation and a modification. So accommodations change the environment of the student. It changes the environment, the format of the curriculum, but not the curriculum, and the equipment that's needed for a student to access the curriculum and do what they need to do. It's part of the regular class. An accommodation doesn't change what's being taught. It doesn't change what's being assessed. And students who have accommodations are graded using the same scale. So you're not changing the content, you're not changing the grading, you're not changing what's being studied, you're changing the environment or the format or the equipment that the curriculum is being presented with. Modifications are different. Modifications change the curriculum, and they change the curriculum for students who cannot get all the content that's being taught. It can change the way a student is assessed, and it can have a different grading scale. The small, substantially separate classes that I teach are modified classes. The curriculum follows the Massachusetts standard, but we may not do all of the extra curriculum that's in a regular general ed class. The way I give exams can be different. The way I grade can be different than in a general ed class. I may allow my students to do retakes of exams and exchange the grades they get on the retake. That generally does not happen in a general education class. Those are modifications, and in a modified class, they're modified for all of the students. So for example, if you have a sign language interpreter for a deaf student, that's an accommodation. It's not a modification because the material is still, that's being taught is exactly the same. Any assessment will be the same, and the grading scale will be the same. If students have extended time, that is an accommodation, again, because what's being taught is the same, the grading scale will be the same, and the assessment is basically the same. It's just giving a student who may have processing speed issues time to get through the entire exam. In my small substantially separate class, we use a different textbook. Again, it covers the same material, but the reading grade is at a middle school rather than a high school level. And it is different than the textbook that's in the general ed class, but again, it's a modification. It's not an accommodation because the content has been changed. Does anybody have a question about that? Now, if we go to the next slide for a minute, this is something that you guys may already be using, or you may be using your own version of it. We threw it in here because it's a nice, quick, and cheap approach to the PLEP A modifications when there may be 10 to 20 of them in an IEP. And the way I set this up, it's just a grid. It's got, instead of the student's name, we should have initials for privacy regulations, but since this is all made up, it doesn't really matter for our purposes. There's a column for the disability, and it can include comorbidities or additional, but not the main disability. Then across the top, there are a list of the more common accommodations and or modifications. And I've used my own abbreviations. If you like this, I'm sure you all have your own to use as well. PS stands for preferential seating, queuing, note-taking, motion breaks, check-ins, trunking, rewording. Again, binder checks. These are things that you see on many IEPs. They're very they're not only accommodations, they're good teaching strategies. But if you have, in this case, there are 6, you may have 8, you may have 10 kids in your inclusion class on an IEP. This will give you a sense of where you have to spend your time. You have to check in with 4 students. You know who they are at a glance. You have to take, in elementary schools, you have to give a few kids motion breaks. There they are. You know which ones to go to right away. It also helps because if students aren't using their accommodations, maybe they shouldn't be in the IEP. So if a student doesn't need a check-in because they're doing what they should be doing, they're accessing the curriculum without you going over to them and seeing what's going on, maybe we can take it out. And again, as Linda said, the goal is to make students as independent as possible. And if you see that students aren't using their accommodations, it's something you should bring up to the teacher. If a student's accommodation is to take an exam in a separate setting, and they never want to leave the classroom to do it, well, maybe they don't need it. And again, it's something that should be discussed and looked into. And if you use a chart like this, there are plenty of places to take notes and again, to see what the student is using, what should be used, and it does make your job easier. And sometimes teachers have their own checklist and they may ask you to take data using one. So it's just a tool that we thought might be useful for you.
All right, Linda, you want to go over a few of these? You're muted right now. There you go.
Sorry. So one thing,
Excuse me, Linda, one other thing that I have to say, and that is instructional assistants and paraprofessionals don't make modifications to the curriculum. You implement them, but you don't make them. That is the teacher's responsibility. And if they ask you to modify the curriculum, that is not, you don't have to do that. Okay? This is what teachers are being paid a hell of a lot more than you are to do. So please keep that in mind.
also because, you know, we're dealing again with a legal document, and if things need to be modified from a classroom, that is really not our responsibility. And it can come back to bite you if you do it. So I never make modifications. I will sit with a teacher and talk about it, but I'm not going to make that decision. So some of these we're just looking at to see if you think they're modifications or accommodations. And so reduced number of homework items. Modification or accommodation?
Modification.
Gina, what did you say?
Reduce the number of homework items, I think is a modification.
Why?
Why?
Because because it's part of the curriculum.
So this is one of those, this is where a lot of this becomes fuzzy. Because if you're in a math class, and there are 40 homework problems, and the teacher decides, you know, it's on your IEP that you have a reduced number. If that teacher keeps all of the content there, but there's just less practice, that's an accommodation. Because they've just cut the practice. The whole curriculum is still there. If they
Well, when she cuts the number of homework and she'll say, instead of having him do, no, she'll ask me, can you modify the homework? She does ask me. So that's what she tells me. So is it an accommodation?
If they're covering all of the same material. Now, if you're skipping a chunk of information,
Okay, I got you.
yeah, if you're skipping a whole chunk of information, like a whole section in a chapter, then that becomes a modification. And she really needs to give you more direction than just modify the homework.
Yeah, but like, for instance, when the homework is, you are modifying, well, all right, I don't know how to explain it, but the reduced number of homework items. So there's 10 for homework, 10.
Yep.
Mhm.
So you're gonna ask the person to do 7. And you're gonna say, here's the calculator, here's a timesheet with it. Here's the some IEP say an abacus, but you mean a calculator. So you give them all the tools.
So when we talk about modifications, we're talking about changes to the curriculum. So if they're doing 7 questions out of 10, and the first 2 are addition, the second 2 are subtraction, the third 2 are 5 and 6 are multiplication, 7 and 8 are division, and 9 and 10 are fractions. If they don't ever get the fractions, then yes, you've modified. But if you say to that student, I want you to do 1 through 6 and then 7, 8, 9, or 7, 8, 9, and 10, like that, so they're getting each concept, then it's an accommodation because they're still practicing the same thing that everybody else is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But when we modify, we don't give those because we know that if it's in the IEP that they can't
Well,
have a certain if their disability is a reading disability, we're not going to give them for homework reading problems because you know what's going to happen. The parent has to read it. They get frustrated. So this is like the ongoing.
Yes.
mhm.
I'm so glad you brought this up, Gina, because this is a big part of why we actually want you all to think about this concept. When we talk about accommodations and modifications, if we are not clear about whether we're modifying or accommodating, it's not really fair to anyone because if we're saying we're providing accommodations, which means that the student really is doing everything that everyone else is doing, but we really are modifying, so they're not, well, that student's grade becomes inflated. So the student is in middle school and is getting all A's because he's being accommodated when really we're modifying everything. Now that student thinks they can go to high school and be in the highest level because they're getting all A's. So they get to the high school, what happens? They start to flunk. They have to drop down in levels and everybody's surprised. The parents are surprised, the students surprised, like what happened? I was so great. And then all of a sudden I'm not great. Same thing happens in high school. If we're modifying, so changing the curriculum, so they're not practicing the same things, they're not learning the same things, but we say we're just accommodating, they think they're going to get into like the best colleges, and they may, because their grades may reflect that. That's a pretty expensive mistake to make because a
I
student gets
just
into a college
feel
they
like-
can't do, and then they flunk out.
No, that's true. But if they get straight A's, then what do you think is going to happen? The ETL comes up and says, "Time for this person to get off an IEP." If I've 30 years of this, I've done my master's in it.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to this than just that.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's why we bring it up because it sounds so simple, right? Accommodations and modifications, but it's really not.
It's not.
And
No.
a lot of the things that are on this slide could go either way depending on how it's implemented.
Exactly.
Right, and
So-
I also think part of the problem is the word modify, because commonly you say modify, it means change of some kind. Here, it's a legal definition in that a modification, you're taking away part of the curriculum. It's not that you're just changing the format of it. You're actually limiting it. And, you know, you can say, like, if you're cooking something, I modified that recipe.
Sometimes we don't modify for that reason. Sometimes we modify because the person has anxiety, or
Yes.
I modified for like today. I had 3 people that, yeah, I'm not going to say the name, but they were suicidal. So we cannot give them this.
Right.
I think you'd have to also be privy to who you're dealing with. There's a lot of
Right.
yeah. Years ago, you could just say modification, accommodation. Today, you can't.
Right.
And
There
the other, but the other thing is,
a lot of
if it's written into the IEP as an accommodation, then we treat it as an accommodation. If it's written as a modification, it's a modification.
yeah,
And so we have to be very careful.
we have a lot of amendments with COVID.
Mm.
We haven't seen this kind of not only disability, but we're going to mental health. I want to say
Mhm.
we have a lot of mental health at the moment.
Yeah. So I think that the big takeaway from this is that people understand clearly what it is that you're doing. No matter what we call it, if parents and students understand, no matter what we call it, like, you're not doing what everybody else, you are not doing the same thing right now for whatever reasons, but you need to be aware of that. And everyone should be aware of that, because that has
Don't get me wrong, there
ramifications.
are kids that'll take it as a crutch. They'll say, "Oh, can you modify that?" You have to leave
Yeah.
those kids out.
Right.
Um,
All right. Unfortunately, we have to move on from this.
Sorry.
yeah, Helen, we have
No, we only
about,
have like 7 minutes left.
Yeah.
If I had my way, Gina, we'd just keep talking about this for the rest of the time.
Thank you.
But we really do want to try to get through this. So when we look at there's a PLEP A, and did we talk about PLEP A already?
yes.
Okay. So then we have a PLEP B, and that's talking about requirements that usually require consultation or collaboration with specialists. So the accommodations and the modifications might be a little different, and there might be additional ones to the ones that you'll see on PLEP A. So when you're accessing your IEPs, you really want to look at PLEP A and PLEP B. So some of the other educational needs are needs that don't necessarily relate to the curriculum, the academic curriculum. So there are social emotional needs, and there are travel training and behavioral needs and vocational needs that we don't necessarily equate with the traditional academic curriculum. So, but they are still educational needs. And so we have to think about if there are accommodations and modifications that we need there as well. All right. Stephanie.
Okay, goals and objectives are what you are working on with your students as the year unfolds. Goals, you should think of goals as the big umbrella. They're what the student should be working towards all through the year. The objectives are the little steps that will get the student towards their goal. Goals and objectives, before you even start with them, you have to assess the student's current performance level. And again, this is an area where you can be of great help to the teacher that you're working with, because you have a really good sense of what the student can do.
Yes.
Goals can be written language, they can be executive function goals, they can be math goals, they can be social emotional goals. There are a lot of different categories, but they have to be measurable and they have to be attainable within a year or the length of the IEP. So we assess their current level, we determine the goal, and usually students have anywhere from 2 to 4 goals. Some students come with a lot of goals. By the time they get to high school, it's usually down to 1 or 2. The objectives, again, get the student towards the goal. They have to be measurable. And again, you may be making progress towards a goal without meeting it. The idea is, as you go through the year, you need to show progress. If students do not show progress, then team meetings have to be called and the goal has to be reassessed and it may be rewritten. But again, it's supposed to be attainable within a year. And sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not, and sometimes they're expanded for the next IEP. They've made some progress, but they haven't reached the goal, so the goal is reassessed.
So service delivery breaks down what the goals are, how they're going to be achieved, and who is going to be delivering services. So consultation is usually with the teacher, but if there's like a speech and language consult for one of your students, if you can be part of that conversation, that would be great. I have learned so much from Helen and picking Helen's brain. That's been very good for me. The direct services, those are the things that a lot of that we're the ones that are going to be implementing the goals and objectives underneath under a teacher's direction. And these are legally binding. So it's important to look at these and determine which things are important and which ones we're working on. Okay, so we talked about knowing, accessing the IEP. I think at the lower grades, it's different than at the high school. You're usually with one teacher in one classroom, and that gives you a nice opportunity to build a relationship with that teacher and to really work with your students. I have 8 classes with 7 different teachers. So it's a different kind of animal in high school. We're running around a little bit more. And I think in a lot of cases, we are the ones that are providing teachers a lot of the information from the IEPs and what needs to be implemented.
All right, put that in there. Next.
Okay, and
Alrighty.
there are also MCAS accommodations that are in the IEP, and this is something that you deal with if you proctor MCAS, depending on your district. You may be one-on-one with a student, you may proctor a few students, but again, this is a district, more of a district by district issue.
It is 5:30. We probably have another 5 minutes to go. We do want to honor your time, so if any of you need to leave, that's great. That's certainly fine. But I know we're willing to stay on and we'd like to finish this. We have like probably 5 more slides to go through. So
yeah.
If you can stay on, great. If not, thank you very much for coming. Okay, so here are these are the people who should be your best line of collaboration when it comes to working with our special ed students. So you're not alone. You really are not. And I can tell you from my perspective, I value what you have to say. I love to collaborate with all of the paraprofessionals because they're the ones who are in there. I can only be with a student 30 minutes once a week, maybe twice a week, but you can be with them a lot. So we can get a lot of really good work done if we collaborate. So the other thing is in special ed, these students aren't their students, they're all of our students. So anytime we can work together, we can and we should. All right. So we didn't talk at all about the difference between 504s and IDEA. So
This will be in the presentation. You will get a copy of it, and they're
Yes.
two different laws, basically.
they're just two different laws. One has IEPs and one just basically has accommodations. So we wanted to just touch on that. I did want to talk about collaboration, and maybe this will be one of our last things, but Linda, if you can talk about collaboration, I think that this is pretty important, and then we'll try to end it here.
So in an ideal world, we would have common planning time. That actually happened to me once for one semester. But meeting with your teacher, and let's face it, we all do this because we love it. We're not doing it for the money. So we're there early, we're there late, we're sneaking conversations here and sneaking conversations there to get things done for our students, because that is our priority. So if you can have some common planning time, that's absolutely the best. Previewing the work and asking for an answer key. I'm kind of weird. I'm in math and I have to do it myself just because that's me. But definitely ask for an answer key. And as Steph said before, you know, anything that you notice, whether it's with a kid on an IEP or a student that you're just concerned about, you know, bring that up with the teacher. You can help set up small groups. The specialists are a wealth of information. I can't say enough how much I have learned from these two ladies over the years, and it has made me so much better at my job.
And just from a teacher's perspective, I once set up, at the beginning of the year, I set up a group of kids, and the IA in the room said to me, "You don't want to do that. These two kids have hated each other since they were in middle school. Do not put them in the same group." And I was so grateful. And I mean, that's just one example of the number of times IAs have helped save the kids from teacher, I'm not going to say mistakes. Well, yeah, I could say mistakes, from teacher mistakes, because we don't always know things that you know. So again, it's a two-way street on this. And the best relationship really you can have in your classroom is between you and your teacher, and for the teacher's benefit as well.
Yep. So you really want to just make sure that you, if you're able, during collaboration, I'm a huge proponent of communication, and upfront and as soon as possible. So even at the beginning of the year, if you can discuss your expectations and the teacher's expectations so that you're on the same page, because sometimes we run into trouble when the teacher expects you to be Vanna White and you expect to take a larger role and you want to do something else, or the teacher wants you to do everything and it's really out of the scope of your responsibility. So discussing with your teacher your expectations. So I think that I'll be doing these kind of things. Is that accurate? Is pretty important. And it's good to come up with a plan, preferably written at the beginning of the year, so that there really isn't any confusion. Because let's face it, we're not in each other's minds. So sometimes teachers have expectations or we have expectations and the two don't jive. And that is, you know, that's pretty important, that you make sure that you communicate clearly so that you all understand, so that you can have an understanding of what is best for the student, right? You really want to just not only consider the roles, but also each other's strengths and weaknesses, and then try for that constructive but constant communication. So those are the biggies. And because we can run into glitches with this stuff. So you want to talk about that one, Linda? And then we'll,
Yeah.
we're going to be done, but we're going to be done. This is the last one, I promise.
So a possible glitch, and this is more IA to IA. We all work with IAs that are not doing their job. And that's a tough position to be in. A conversation with the teacher in the classroom is a good place to start. If not, a case manager or going to the head of your department. We should not be picking up the slack for people that aren't doing their job. And that's a touchy situation, but it's something that's not fair and needs to be addressed. Teacher is controlling. This one's tough. And again, I think what Helen has just said, having that conversation before you even start to work with that person about what you expect to be doing in the classroom, how you need to support your students, laying that groundwork can alleviate a lot of this. It doesn't always work. And then the conversations need to be had about what your students are not getting. And that's how I would frame that conversation, is like, he needs to have this, and we're not able to do that because of. So again, framing that, because that's your concern, is that the student's not getting what you need, what they need from you and from the teacher. So again, you going always back to the IEP, what the goals and objectives are and how best to help that student.
Great. So here's our last slide for you, even though I promised the last one was the last slide. We do think this is a team effort. We believe in it strongly. We have seen what happens when we work together, like the three of us who do it all the time. Okay. It's a pretty powerful experience when you collaborate well with someone and when everyone is on the same page and everybody understands. So it really does require all of our support for students to be successful. So thank you for doing what you do. We really appreciate it. And we couldn't do it without you.
And thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
We're very passionate about what we do, and it's nice to be with people who share that.
Thank you very much. I've learned a lot.
You guys are changing lives. You are changing lives for the better for the rest of their life. Remember that.
Yeah.
Thank you.